Okay, we're going to get started. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm probably have some karaoke survivors that are might be your first session of the day, but it's a good choice. So we have two half-hour sessions, and our first session is going to focus on work at the Isabella Stewart Gardner, and instead of me introducing our speakers, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. First up is Christina Nelson.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to stand, but I swear I'm not going to sing. Karaoke's over. I'm going to talk instead. I'm delighted to welcome you all here this morning. As Scott said, I'm Christina Nelson, the William and Leah Purvu Curator of Collections and Exhibition Programs at the Gardner Museum in Boston, and I'm here with my colleague and good friend, Michelle Grohe, our Assistant Curator for Education and School programs, also at the Gardner. We are clearly not museum technologists, and I thought maybe there would be 5 people in the audience. So I'm really glad there are so many museum technologists and people from a couple of other fields here today. We, educators, or curators, or whatever department you want to call, who are not museum technologists, are here really to work with you. MCN, of course, is advancing digital change, but I think you all know you aren't going to be the sole carriers of change across your organization. You need us, we need you. And I'm a curator. I know that either as an individual or as a type, I will either be the bane of your existence or I will be a wonderful collaborator. I try to be the latter more than the former. Except when I feel that I need to be. But really, in this session, what I and Michelle would like to do with you is to really talk a bit about my role personally at the Gardner, go into a couple of specifics in terms of what we are doing, curatorial and digital together. But I also want to step back and have you kind of think of me as a type, the curatorial type. And what I would really love to see you take away from this session is to perhaps have a little more empathy for me, the curator. You talk a lot about being empathic and not letting workplaces be toxic. I do have to say, in the sessions that I've attended at MCN, that they've been fabulous, but occasionally I hear a little less than empathy for curators and directors. So let's have a really open, honest conversation today, and then hopefully you'll take what we discussed from this session and the other sessions you're at, back to the conversations that you're going to be having with your curators and your educators at your respective institutions. So briefly, what is the Gardner Museum? What are we doing? This is one of our outdoor gardens. This is our palace. Those of you who've been to the Gardner know. We opened in 1903, and this is the palace, which houses our historic collection. The Gardner was started by a very kind of against the grain, forward-thinking, visionary, eccentric, difficult, whatever you want to call her, woman in Boston who had the right kind of checkbook at the right time to swoop in and purchase 7,000 works of art that run very high: Botticelli, Michelangelo, Whistler, Manet, Matisse, to very low, literally bric-a-brac. And it's the spaces in between that really make our galleries the total works of art that they are, as we refer to them. She loved the art of the past, but she also saw her institution as being a catalyst for change in its own time, and knew that it was the creative minds of her day that would really carry Boston and America, which she called the young country, forward. And she believed very deeply in philanthropy and thought that beauty was something the country needed. And so she was giving it to her community in the form of her museum. So our umbrella is really large. Our mission is very broad. I'm particularly interested in the first bullet point. As curator of the collection, I am really charged with both preserving and animating the collection, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and both are responsibilities that have their share of challenges and opportunities. But you'll see the lower bullet points, we're still very much championing and supporting creative minds, local artists, international artists, performers, and other other types of forward-moving and creative thinkers. Mrs. Gardner also considered her museum, the Palace, as almost a salon, so a place where creative minds could come together, and there were performances and lectures in addition to just the experience of coming in and viewing great works of art. We carry that legacy forward, particularly in a new building that the Gardner built, which opened in 2012, designed by Renzo Piano, which houses a number of new visitor amenities spaces, so a museum education studio, an exhibition space, a music performance space. This is our Calderwood Hall. We have classical music, we have jazz music, we have neo-funk, gospel, soul. Come next time you're in Boston and experience music in this space. We also have a contemporary art program. The new building has 2 apartments, so at any given time we will have artists in residence, and by artists we are speaking very broadly. We also have educators in residence, like Scott's wife, Chris Vetterland. Was with us, and we've had chefs, and we had Bill Cunningham of the New York Times several years ago. So different people with very sort of different vantage points on the visual and what it means. We also are at a pivotal moment. We have new leadership, new executive leadership. Peggy Fogelman joined as our director, I think about 9 months ago now. And so we know we're moving forward by thinking about how the past communicates and informs the present and the future. We know that many people you either love the Gardner or you hate it. I hope you love it more than you hate it. But we want your mind to be engaged and your heart to be engaged when you visit. We have world-class art, so come and experience that, and hopefully when you do, and particularly more in the future, digital will help with that experience. But we also want to reach the broadest possible audience. So Michelle will talk more about how we're moving to more visitor center focus. This is our courtyard. It's the heart and soul of the museum at the center, at the core. This is the first aha moment. Visitors come in, and particularly in the winter in Boston, out of the cold, out of the snowdrifts, and into this courtyard, which transports you to a completely different place. So really takes you out of your everyday life. And after this aha moment, you either can sustain that level of amazingness as you go through the museum, or you'll quickly become disappointed. We have been working recently with Frankly Green and Webb and doing visitor journey mapping, and we know about the sort of highs and lows of visitors' experience as they go through the galleries. Our galleries, as I've mentioned, are considered total works of art. So Mrs. Gardner jam-packed them full of incredible things and a wide variety of things. Can you spot the Rembrandt and the Dürer in this picture? If not, don't freak out. A lot of people can, a lot of people can't. And you'll notice that we have no labels. We have no wall texts. So sometimes people say to me, what do you do as a curator if you're not writing labels all the time? I have a lot to do, because I have to preserve this vision forever, which is a really long time and takes a number of conscious choices. But that's another topic. For our visitors, they come in and they don't have the scaffolding that they have in a traditional museum. They don't know, unless they know, which one is the Dürer and which one is the Rembrandt. And it's beautiful because interpretation then is very much open and open to them, which is great, but it can also be a challenge, and we hear that a lot, because, my God, where do you start? If you're standing in front of a great work of art like John Singer Sargent's El Jaleo here in our Spanish cloister, you have a couple of different resources for trying to figure out what you're looking at and where you are. They're very traditional. So on your right, you'll see laminated room guides, which kind of read like a phone book and tell you what a work of art is called and when it was painted and who the painter was. But people don't like to touch them because they think there are germs on them, or they don't want to hog the resources. The other tool they can use is the audio guide, but as I'm sure you already know, demographics for using audio guides tend to skew a little bit older. So now I'm getting to, where does digital fit in? And in my pie in the sky view, digital will fit in another year or two by allowing visitors to pull out their mobile, stand in front of the Sargent, learn more about Sargent and Gardner's relationship because they were really good friends and they took the tea together around Boston to see movies. They wrote each other notes because they couldn't text, but if they could have texted, they would have done it all day long because we have copious short notes between the two of them. But you'd stand there, you'd learn more about the painting, you'd learn more about Gardner because we know people are really fascinated by her. And then you would see sketches from a preparatory book of sketches that Sargent made as he was working on this painting that we have in our collection, but it sits in a drawer that's shut. So you would be able, I hope, or will, on your phone or your iPad or whatever, to look at some sketches if you want to. Or if you like music, you can tap into the multidisciplinary sort of legacy of the Gardner by listening to flamenco records that Sargent gave to Gardner that are in our collection that we've digitized. So you could stand there and actually listen to this painting as much as you could look at it. We are currently launching a prototyping effort for a mobile guide, and we've received a CRESS interpretive fellow resource. Oh, there she is, Mary Carmen Barrios here with us. So Mary Carmen is going to be a great help in moving that forward. So stay tuned, coming to the Gardner soon. We did have an opportunity this past year to do things very differently than we normally do. We had a second floor roof that needed to be replaced. So I was able, as the curator of a fixed collection, to actually take a number of works out of the palace environment, out of that heavily layered, dense installation, and put them into our new exhibition space in a way that looks like a regular museum experience, so labels, wall texts. And people loved it. Even though a third of our historic gallery spaces were closed, we had our highest attendance numbers ever. We didn't lose membership. In fact, we gained a bit. So we thought this might have a cataclysmic effect for many different reasons, and I'm not saying solely because of the exhibition, but because of the hard work of a number of colleagues across the institution, we were able to really offer a different kind of experience. And what we learned from that was that people really do want deeper dives into the collection. They do want to know more about it, and they want to know about the stories behind the acquisitions and this amazing woman who put the collection together. So coming back again, where does digital fit in? And until very, very recently, the answer was nowhere. We were very happily a tech-free zone. Visitors couldn't even take photos in the palace until just over a year ago. We are now at a point where I think we're really running to catch up. So we not only are trying to meet audiences where they are by allowing for them to engage with the collection in ways they want to. As I've said, a new mobile guide will help for greater transparency, access into the collection. But I would say I've always felt, since I came to the Gardner about 2.5 years ago, digital, in fact, was going to be as important for our institution as that new building was. Renzo Piano's wing is beautiful, lots of windows, light, it's transparent, it welcomes people and different types of audiences in new ways. And digital will do the same, we hope. So we have a newly launched Department of Digital and IS. I think many of you know our new Director of Digital, fearless leader, Carolyn Royston, your next MCN president. And she's working with us on launching a new website and a number of different initiatives. I want to just close my spiel by saying, as a curator, someone like Carolyn in my midst helps so much because she constantly sort of rattles, tests my assumptions, and pushes me to try new things like social media. So I am on Twitter. Please note the handle. I'd love to get more followers today, if I can. So that's really new for me. And it is not the kind of thing I was trained to do 20 years ago. In the View from the Top session that we just attended, we heard Susan Taylor of NOMA talking about a generational shift. And for those of you who are working with younger curators, you know they've got the skills, they're digital natives, great. But I'm kind of a dinosaur. As a 46-year-old curator, I'm a dog who does have to learn new tricks. And I'm open to it, or I wouldn't be standing here. But I will say, going back to empathy, I had a moment of epiphany at Museums in the Web 2015 where I attended a workshop led by Carolyn, and found out a real truth, which is for many of you, curators are the problem, which made me very uncomfortable and a little bit mad, but I decided I was going to fully own that. I would like for you to understand, though, for people like me, trained 20 years ago, I entered a museum field that looked very different than the landscape we have today. Curators like me were trained in our ivory towers to work on our own and then push out perfect products for people to enjoy. Your jobs didn't even exist when I started in the field. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. And I have enjoyed getting to know many of you and working in new and different collaborative ways, even though, again, that's not what I was trained to do. And I'm a problem. Got it. But what I want to get back to, I can be, but what I want to get back to at the end of this session is thinking about another epiphany I had at my second Museums on the Web this year, which was sitting in sessions and listening to museum technologists talk about digital transformation and what the roadblocks were to that, and constantly hearing the roadblocks, again, were the curators and the directors. And while I love an echo chamber, I like being with other curators, and I find it incredibly supportive, I realized at AAMC, we're talking to the converted. At MCN, Museums on the Web, you are preaching to your own choir too. That's why Michelle and I are here today. We have to find now ways to really talk to each other and work with each other. So I would say, yes, I can be a problem, but I would ask you to consider ways in which maybe your problems too, right? So let's open up the dialogue, and I'm gonna now sit down and be quiet and turn over the mic to Michelle.
I feel like I should start karaoke with 99 problems now after that.
I'm not one of them.
Hi, I'm Michelle Grohe, and I'm the Education Perspective. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk today. And I was thrilled when I saw the theme for MCN was about human-centered design, and I wanted to talk through a couple examples of human-centered design, both in terms of with our audiences as well as internally, because there have been a lot of shifts internally. At a place like the Gardner, there's a lot of tension between the objects that we are, as in Christina's role, that she's there to curate and also preserve, ensure it's there forever. And then I'm on the other part of the equation of, well, how do people engage with them, or how are they not engaging with them? And a lot of the transformation that we've been experiencing as a museum, coupled with Carolyn's arrival as our director of digital, really parallel a lot of shifts and re-emphasis on the visitor experience at the Gardner Museum. And I wanted to just walk you through a couple of those examples. So I work with kids, and I work with teachers, and this is why I go to work every day. And this is great because part of this transformation is, for a really long time, my first role would be, could you please put your phone away? And so what I'm really excited about when we think about where we're going with digital technology and also transformation is helping our visitors, regardless of who they are, connect with the museum. How are they really experiencing what's happening? So I spend a lot of times in the gallery, and I also spend a lot of times with my time with program evaluation, and we're starting to think a lot about not just what quantifiable measures. So a lot of my work has been about critical thinking skills and aesthetic development, and we're spending a lot of time looking at comfort and confidence within the museum environment and how that meaning making is taking place. So here students are doing a post-pre retrospective, thinking, okay, at the beginning of the year, how comfortable was I here at the Gardner? And now at the end of the year, after working with you, this is where my comfort is. So doing more of these interactive, kind of quick, iterative feedback loops. We also are starting to do that across the museum. So here we have a facade installation on the front of the building. So we have art on the outside of the museum as well. What types of questions come up for you when you're looking at things like that? So we have an interactive art wall where we asked visitors, what do you really want? And there was a prompt in terms of, that could be anything from life to politics to what you want to eat for lunch. And then there was another section of, what do you really want from the Gardner? And asking for that quick feedback, just writing it on a Post-it was really helpful for us to think about what is that visitor experience as you come through the museum. We've also been using this art wall to get really quick feedback about an upcoming exhibition, which is now currently on view. We are featuring Italian Renaissance books and manuscripts, most of which are about the size of your hand. And so for our department, we were thinking really carefully, how are we going to teach in that environment? How are we going to connect with visitors? So we previewed some key components of the exhibition, as well as our themes, our images, got a lot of really helpful feedback. So that's part of our working cross-departmentally to start thinking about how we can address that, whether it's in the labels, our marketing strategy, or how we teach in those spaces. And I wanted to, there's my Twitter feed, so we can be friends on Twitter as well. So Christina and I started working together quite a bit about 2 years ago or 3 years ago. We started a digital task force at the museum, and no one in that task force was a digital person. We had one person from IT, so I guess he is digital, but and that was it. So it was really interesting working collaboratively as a group and kind of struggling with this as an institution that really was not digital savvy, was not embracing digital, but we made that commitment and we wanted to move forward. So it was a great way to, when you're talking about empathy, understanding your point of view. I got to really understand our IT point of view. I mean, just practicing things from design thinking, like an empathy interview, or really just sitting down and having a cup of coffee and listening to each other. Why are you struggling with this? Or what are you concerned about? What should I be concerned about? How can we meet together in the middle and think about how we can both bring our expertise to tackle some of those things? I also was starting to use Twitter and social media to reach out with colleagues in the education field. I was doing a lot of that at the time, more for professional organizations like the National Art Education Association, and kind of learning as I went, because we as an institution weren't quite ready to do that internally. So there was a lot of learning from colleagues in the field about how they were doing that, and then bringing those lessons learned and applying them at the Gardner. And I just want to highlight two more quick digital examples. I was on the digital prototype project team, so which I was like, okay, great. I don't know what that means. So like I said, I'm a teacher, but here at heart, I'm an educator. But with this, we started thinking about videos that we could put online to show visitors behind the scenes aspects of an upcoming exhibition about the artist Carlo Crivelli. So I was able to work with a team to think about what some of those stories and lenses should be based on visitor feedback or interest. So we did one about how do you actually create an exhibition at the Gardner in a museum where you're not allowed to move anything permanently. We did one about a video about conservation, how do we preserve that collection, and then we had a longer video about really close looking and learning to look and what that looks like as well. And I learned very quickly that producing videos is quite time consuming, and that I do not have the skill set to do that. But I also learned that, I like to have longer videos to demonstrate to others what you can do at the Gardner, but obviously an 8-minute video is not something that we can tweet out. So what are different ways that we need to think about working together to think about the different purposes of some of the digital media and how they'll be used? And lastly, I just wanted to highlight too, we recently switched museum-wide to Google platforms. So how can I extend the reach of what I do through looking at digital communication and technology? So here were Google Hangouts with Australians, which was a lot of fun. And just really quickly, lastly, we're in the middle of kicking off a redesign of our website. And that's a big project that Carolyn is spearheading with us at the Gardner. And as Christina said, we went through a series of visitor journey mapping with Frankly Green and Webb. And what was really interesting, again, is thinking about how can we break across those silos, learn from one another, but also really challenge our assumptions about what visitors do, not just in the galleries, the entry sequence, the exit, where those pain points are. And also, how can we really not just think about these visitors as motivational types or what motivates them, but also as humans and what actually happens when they're there. And it was great to have these workshops where we can work through that together. It was also amazing as a person who collected the interviews to hear a lot of those perspectives, because I don't think about how hard it is to find the bathroom. I think about how hard it is where I have to tell everyone where the bathroom is, but I don't think about what that impact is. So I found that really helpful. And lastly, as Christina was saying, we're starting in, as part of our digital prototyping that Mari Carmen is helping us with, we're in the middle of an interpretation audit of getting a sense of what we already have to offer and bringing that together with with aspirational visitors that we have in terms of target audiences, starting to think about what we already have to offer, what others are looking for, and where we can, again, bring those things together to create the best resources. And our time is up. Thank you, Scott.
It's hard because we've got these half-hour sessions with no time to switch. So I'm sure many of you have questions. It's a great presentation. What I'm thinking, so we can do presentations and we can switch up for the presentation that's supposed to start in 2 minutes, is if you guys maybe could move down this way, and you guys can start asking questions, and if Carly and Emily could come up. And before we even do that, why don't we give these guys a hand?